Marcus always knew that life could be challenging. Growing up in a neighborhood where echoes of the past still reverberated around every corner, he learned early on that the world was often unfair. Racism was ingrained in everyday interactions, in the small looks of disdain and whispered words that seemed louder than they were. Yet he was always resilient. Ever since he was a child, he dreamed of becoming an FBI agent, believing that by joining the force, he could make a difference in a system that often seemed indifferent to the injustices that people like him faced. Marcus graduated with honors, his determination driving him to overcome obstacles that would have discouraged others. As he walked down the hallway of the FBI during his first week on the job, he could feel the adrenaline and anticipation pumping through his veins. However, he soon realized that even in a supposedly egalitarian environment, the shadows of prejudice still lingered. Snarky comments from colleagues, suspicious looks. All of these reminded him that to some, his skin color still made him an outsider. It was an ordinary morning when he received the call that would change his life. The fluorescent light in his office illuminated his desk, which was piled high with reports and documents as he analyzed the next case. His supervisor, a serious-looking woman, walked into his office, closing the door behind her. Her face was tense, and Marcus felt a chill in his stomach. He knew something was about to happen. "Marcus, we need you for a special mission," she said, her deep voice breaking the silence. "A racist criminal organization is expanding, and we have information that they are recruiting new members. We need someone who can go undercover and find out what they're planning. Do you think you are up to it?" The proposal took him by surprise. Marcus knew that infiltrating such a hostile group would not be easy. Memories of his own encounters with prejudice haunted him. Yet a spark of determination ignited within him. This was his chance to prove himself, not only to the FBI, but to himself as well. He nodded, deciding that he would not back down. "I'm in," he replied, his voice steady, though his heart was racing. He was preparing to enter a dark and treacherous world, a world where discrimination and hatred were the norm. Over the next few days, he immersed himself in the necessary training. He learned about the organization's culture and hierarchy, absorbing every detail to ensure his new identity was convincing. As the day of his infiltration approached, his mind raced with doubts. What if he was discovered? What if he couldn't handle the hostility he would face? But the thought of failure was never an option. On the eve of his mission, Marcus looked into the mirror and saw himself reflected back. The man staring back had determination in his eyes and a weight on his shoulders. He wasn't just infiltrating a criminal group, he was challenging a system that oppressed him. With that determination, he went to bed, knowing that when dawn broke, he would begin a journey that would test not only his skills, but his identity as well. As the sun rose, illuminating his room, he arose with a renewed sense of purpose. His mission awaited him, and he was ready to face whatever came. Through the shadows of prejudice, he would seek the truth, determined to turn his experience into a fight for justice. Marcus woke up early, still immersed in a mixture of anxiety and excitement. He dressed with meticulous care, choosing an outfit that balanced the casual appearance with that of someone who might be a new member of a criminal organization. The plan was to present himself as an outsider, a guy who was looking for a new life away from his old reality. Before leaving, he took one last look in the mirror, adjusting his tie and trying to reinforce the confidence in his gaze. The meeting point was a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of town, a place known for its shady associations. Marcus arrived a little early, his heart pounding as he surveyed the patrons. The atmosphere was heavy, permeated by whispered conversations and suspicious glances. He knew he was about to enter a world that would require much more than just investigative skills. It would require an emotional resilience he wasn't sure he possessed. Finally, a burly man entered the bar, his presence dominating the room. He introduced himself as Frank, the leader of the group, and quickly began interacting with the members nearby. Marcus approached, trying to appear casual, as if he were there just to socialize. After a few hesitant exchanges, Frank walked over to him. "So, are you new around here?" Frank asked, his smile not reaching his eyes. "What brings you to this side of town?" Marcus took a deep breath, remembering his instructions. "I'm just looking for a place to fit in," he said, trying to sound casual. "I heard a few things about what you guys are doing and thought it might be interesting." Frank's eyes sparkled with interest. "This isn't for the faint of heart, kid. You have to be willing to do whatever it takes." The first day was an emotional roller coaster. Marcus was introduced to the other members, all with different backgrounds but united by a twisted belief in superiority. He felt the weight of their gaze, a mix of curiosity and distrust. Every racist joke and scornful look he received felt like a punch in the gut. What surprised him was that even amidst the hatred, there was a sense of camaraderie among the group members. Over the course of the week, Marcus dedicated himself to learning as much as he could about the organization. He was shocked by the twisted ideologies that motivated its members. While the others talked about recruitment plans and vandalism, Marcus listened silently, absorbing everything he could report to the FBI. However, the constant humiliation he faced began to take its toll on him. One particularly painful incident occurred during a meeting where Frank led a discussion about a planned attack on a community center. "These people don't belong here," he shouted, and the others agreed, banging tables and laughing. Marcus found himself torn between disgust at what he was hearing and the need to maintain his cover. He felt like an imposter, forced to laugh and join in the conversation even as revulsion consumed him. That night, as Marcus walked home, he allowed himself a moment of weakness. Tears streamed down his face, and he felt completely exhausted. What was supposed to be a mission of discovery and justice had become a daily battle against pain and humiliation. He knew he needed to grow stronger. If he couldn't bear the weight of others' words and actions, he wouldn't be able to fulfill his mission. Over the next few days, Marcus worked hard to maintain an unshakable facade. He developed a friendship with a member of the group, a man named Jake, who seemed more vulnerable and confused about the organization's direction. Jake talked about his own insecurities, and Marcus saw an opportunity to exploit that vulnerability. Over time, he began to build a trusting relationship, trying to gain more insight into the organization's plans. One night after a meeting, Jake pulled Marcus aside. "You seem different from the others. What do you really think about all this?" This was the opportunity Marcus needed. He hesitated for a moment, weighing his words, and then decided to open up a little. "I'm just trying to understand. I'm not like them. I come from a different place, and I want to see if I can make a difference." Jake nodded, seeming to understand. "I'm starting to have doubts too. Sometimes I wonder if this is really what I want." Marcus saw a glimmer of hope in the connection he was forming. If he could reach Jake, perhaps he could influence his view of the organization and eventually dismantle it. But the shadows of his past still haunted him, and the pressure from the group grew stronger by the day. He found himself in a dangerous game, where one wrong move could cost him not only his mission, but his life. As the infiltration continued, Marcus realized that each day was a constant battle. What should have been a mission to dismantle hatred became a personal struggle to not succumb to it. He knew he had to stay strong, not only for his own survival, but for the truth and justice he represented. With every humiliation he endured, with every cruel word he heard, he was reminded of what was at stake. The mission became more than just an operation. It was a fight for dignity, for truth, and for the hope that one day the world would be a more just place for everyone. As the weeks passed, Marcus's infiltration became increasingly challenging. The pressure to fit in grew, and he began to feel the depth of the hostility surrounding him. Each day was a battle not only against the members of the organization, but also against his own feelings of pain and humiliation. The meetings became a ritual, filled with heated discussions about the future of the organization. Racism was at the center of the conversation, and every joke or derogatory comment felt like a direct blow to the heart. One time during one of these meetings, one of the members, a man named Rob, made a particularly cruel comment about a black community leader. Laughter echoed around the room, and Marcus found himself struggling to maintain his composure. "They think they can hide behind their lies," Rob said, his sarcastic tone making it clear there was no room for empathy. "The truth is we are superior, and they need to understand that." The hatred in his words was palpable, and for a moment, Marcus was lost in his own outrage. He wanted to scream. He wanted to confront Rob and everyone else, but he knew that wasn't an option. Instead, he just nodded, smiling tightly, hiding the anger burning inside him. As the days passed, the feeling of alienation grew stronger. Marcus realized that while he was trying to gain Jake's trust, the group's leader, Frank, was becoming increasingly suspicious of his true loyalties. The furtive glances and persistent questions made him uneasy. He needed to be more careful, more cunning. One afternoon, while having coffee with Jake at a local cafe, his friend shared his own frustrations. "You know, I'm starting to feel like this isn't the place for me. I'm not the kind of person I am. I don't feel good about what we're doing," Jake confessed, his voice low, as if he feared being overheard. The opportunity to encourage Jake's doubt was not lost on Marcus. "Have you ever thought about leaving? No one has to live like this, Jake. It's more than just a group. It's about aligning with your own values." Jake hesitated, his gaze distant, reflecting his own internal struggles. "I just don't know how. I want to be a part of something. But this isn't right." Marcus could see the seeds of doubt beginning to germinate. If he could help Jake question his beliefs, perhaps he could use him as an ally. However, Marcus's insecurity grew as tensions rose within the group. A week later, Marcus was summoned to a secret meeting with Frank. The leader seemed more alert, and Marcus knew things were changing. When he entered the room, the atmosphere was tense. Frank was surrounded by high-ranking members, all of them with somber expressions. "We're expanding our operations," Frank announced, his gaze fixed on Marcus. "We need new recruits, and believe me, we can't allow disloyalty to infiltrate our ranks. We're going to start holding our own demonstrations to show what we truly believe in." Frank's words were like a punch to Marcus's stomach. He could tell the group was about to become even more aggressive, and the thought of becoming part of a violent action terrified him. He knew he had to act quickly. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. His thoughts swirled around the meeting and Frank's new directives. He felt trapped, unable to find a way out. The fear of being discovered haunted him, and the responsibility of reporting the group's plans to the FBI weighed heavily on him. What if he failed? What if, in trying to expose the organization, he put his life and Jake's in danger? The next day, Marcus decided he needed to open up to Jake about his concerns. They met in a park, away from the prying ears of the group. Marcus took a deep breath before speaking. "Jake, I need you to know something. What we're doing isn't right. We're about to go too far, and I don't want you to get hurt because of it," Marcus said, his voice shaking with the urgency of his words. Jake looked at him, his face pale. "You're starting to doubt it too, aren't you? I can't stand by while they plan something terrible. I don't want you involved in it," Marcus insisted. Jake hesitated, his gaze conflicted. "But what if they find out? What if you're exposed?" "I don't know, but we need to act. We can't be complicit in this hatred," Marcus replied, his determination growing. "If you join me, we can stop this." Jake's expression changed. He seemed to be considering the proposal, and Marcus knew he was beginning to catch up to his friend. But uncertainty still hung over them like a dark cloud. What had started as a mission to infiltrate and investigate had now become an internal struggle for morality and the courage to face what lay ahead. As they parted, a sense of hope grew in Marcus's heart. He knew the battle was far from over, but maybe, just maybe, he had found an ally in Jake. His friend's transformation could be the key to dismantling the organization and, at the same time, freeing Marcus from his own chains. With this new determination, Marcus returned to his mission, knowing that the challenges were far from over. He prepared himself for what lay ahead, knowing that each step forward could be the hardest yet. The fight against prejudice and hatred was just beginning, and he was ready to face it, not just for himself, but for everyone caught in the grip of discrimination. The days that followed were a mixture of tension and hope for Marcus. He knew that pressure was building within the organization, especially after the meeting with Frank. The mood had become volatile, and he could sense that the other members were beginning to grow more alert, suspicious of any sign of weakness or disloyalty. As Marcus tried to build a stronger bond with Jake, he noticed that his friend was pulling away from the group, hesitant to commit to what was about to happen. The internal conflict Jake was facing was palpable. He alternated between wanting to escape and being loyal to the group, a struggle Marcus understood all too well. One day, as they chatted in a hidden cafe in the city, Jake looked at Marcus with doubtful eyes. "I'm thinking about leaving, But what if I can't? What if they find me? I don't know if I have the courage, he confessed, his tone thick with worry. Marcus felt a surge of empathy. You're not alone, Jake. No matter what happens, don't let fear paralyze you. We can get through this together, he said, trying to convey reassurance. If we can break away from this group, we can do some good. We need to be the change. Jake looked at him, the internal struggle still visible on his face. What if they find out we're planning this? I don't want you to get hurt because of me. I'm willing to take that risk because it's the right thing to do. We need to stop this before someone gets really hurt, Marcus replied, feeling like the words he was speaking were also a reminder to himself. Marcus knew time was running out. Tensions were rising every day, and Frank was increasingly determined to take the organization to a new level of aggression. He couldn't allow Jake to be dragged into the darkness that was coming. That night, Marcus decided to infiltrate the group's trust even further. He began asking more incisive questions, trying to find out what Frank's plans were. Through casual conversation, he began to gather information about the next big meeting they were organizing, where plans of action would be discussed. During one such meeting, the atmosphere was more electric than ever. Frank, ever charismatic, was at the center of attention, urging the members to prepare for a great action. He stood up, gesturing enthusiastically, and spoke about the need to purify society. We need to show them that we're not just words. We're ready to take action, and you all need to be ready to commit, Frank exclaimed, his excitement infectious and reverberating through the room. Marcus felt butterflies in his stomach at the words, the weight of responsibility weighing down on his shoulders. He knew that what was about to happen would not just be a show of force. It would be a real attack. As the meeting ended, Marcus felt torn, helpless. He needed to act, but he didn't know how without risking his own identity. One night, he and Jake met again. It was now or never. Jake, I know we're at a crossroads. We need to decide what we're going to do, Marcus said, his voice thick with urgency. They're planning something big, something dangerous. We can't just sit here and wait. Jake seemed lost in thought. What if we can't get out in time? What if they catch us? Then let's get ready for the fight. We need to gather evidence and report it to the FBI. That's the only way to ensure we don't get dragged into whatever they're planning, Marcus suggested, his determination growing. He didn't know if Jake had the courage to do it, but he couldn't leave his friend behind. I'm with you, Jake finally said, a mix of fear and determination in his eyes. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it together. That night, they planned their next move. Marcus knew they had to act quickly. With each passing day, the tension within the organization grew more tense. The messages they were receiving were clear. Violence was imminent. They needed to gather enough evidence to present to the FBI, but they also needed to prepare for what would come next. The next day, the atmosphere at the group's headquarters was charged with electricity. Frank had called everyone to an emergency meeting, and Marcus sensed that this might be the opportunity he had been waiting for. The meeting was held in a warehouse on the outskirts of town, a place where conversations could become heated and dangerous. As Frank spoke, Marcus listened intently. He began to discreetly record the conversation on his cell phone, knowing that every word could be the key to dismantling the organization. He couldn't let fear paralyze him. The stakes were much higher than his personal safety. Frank was talking about a planned attack on a community event, a place Marcus knew well. Outrage was consuming him, and the thought of innocent people getting hurt fueled him even more. We're going to show them they can't ignore our presence. The attack will happen on Saturday. Prepare for a major showdown, Frank proclaimed, his voice booming in the air. Marcus felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. He couldn't let this happen. The urgency to act intensified, and he knew he needed to alert the authorities as soon as possible. After the meeting, Marcus and Jake quietly stepped aside and began discussing their next steps. We need to contact the FBI immediately. We can't let that happen, Marcus said, his heart pounding. But what if they don't believe us? What if this ends our lives? Jake asked, his gaze filled with fear. If we don't act now, more people will get hurt. We need to do this, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who is in danger, Marcus insisted, the determination in his voice undeniable. With their decision made, they prepared to act. Adrenaline pumped through their veins, and the reality of the situation became clearer with every passing moment. They knew the path ahead would be dangerous, but the fight for justice and truth was now more important than the fear that accompanied them. The atmosphere was thick with the tension of the decision Marcus and Jake had made. That night, while the city slept, the two gathered at a 24-hour coffee shop to make their plans. The soft lighting and steady hum of the coffee machine served as a perfect backdrop to the urgency surrounding them. "So what's our next step?" Jake asked, his voice low, as if he feared being overheard. "What should we tell the FBI?" Marcus stared out the window, his heart pounding at the thought of the lives that could be in danger. "We need to be clear and provide as much information as we can. We need to explain that this isn't just a racist organization. They're about to commit a crime. We need to get enough evidence for them to act quickly," Marcus said, determination etched into his words. Jake nodded, but Marcus could see the doubt in his eyes. "What if they don't believe us? What if we're just two voices lost in a sea of distrust?" Jake questioned, his frustration showing. "We need to stand up for ourselves, Jake. If we don't fight now, many innocent people will suffer," Marcus replied, his voice filled with fervor. What was at stake was not only their safety, but the lives of people they would never meet but who would be impacted by the organization's planned violent action. They decided that the next morning they would make the call to the FBI. As the hours passed, nervousness set in. With each passing minute that dawn approached, Marcus felt his stomach churn with anxiety. But at the same time, a burning determination grew within him. He knew that what they were about to do could change everything. As the sun began to rise over the horizon, they made the phone call. The call rang in his ears like a warning bell. Marcus felt his breathing grow heavier. He gave his name and shared the situation, but at the same time, he knew that by exposing the organization, he was also exposing himself and Jake to danger. But calm voice offered a mix of hope and dread. "Okay, we'll be there soon," Marcus replied, adrenaline pumping through his veins. After hanging up, a heavy silence hung over them. "What now?" Jake asked, a mix of anxiety and fear in his voice. "Now, we need to collect as much evidence as possible before the meeting. We have to make sure they take what we're saying seriously," Marcus said, a plan beginning to form in his mind. The two worked tirelessly over the next few hours, revisiting the organization's headquarters and observing the movements of its members. Marcus used his cell phone to record conversations, capturing every hateful word and attack plan he overheard. With each recording, their conviction that they were doing the right thing grew. Finally, as night fell again, they were ready. With their phones full of evidence, they drove to the FBI office, an imposing building that reflected the seriousness of the mission they were about to undertake. Marcus could feel the weight of responsibility on his shoulders as they parked the car. "Is everything okay, Jake? Are you scared?" Marcus asked, looking at his friend. "Yes, a little. But the stakes are bigger than us. Let's do this," Jake replied, determined. Upon entering the building, they were greeted by an agent who took them to an interrogation room. The room was austere, with white walls and a metal table in the center. The tension grew as the agent settled in and began asking questions. "Why did you decide to introduce yourselves now? What's so urgent?" he asked, his gaze fixed on the two of them. "We're here because we have information about an organization that's about to commit a crime. They're planning an attack on a community event, and we need you to act before it's too late," Marcus said, his voice firm. Jake joined the conversation. "We have recordings that prove their intent. The leader is inciting the group to act violently, and we cannot stand idly by," he added. The agent listened intently, but Marcus could see the suspicion in his eyes. "You know this is a serious accusation. We need concrete evidence so that this isn't just an empty allegation." With a gesture, Marcus pulled out his cell phone and began playing the recordings. As the hateful words and plans for attack echoed through the room, the agent's face changed. Disbelief gave way to seriousness, and he began taking notes. "These recordings are quite shocking. If this is true, we may have a serious problem on our hands," he said, his expression now focused. "We need to act fast. They are preparing for the attack on Saturday. If we don't take immediate action, innocent people could get hurt," Marcus said, his heart racing. The tension in the room rose as the agent picked up his phone and began making calls. "I will engage our team immediately. We cannot underestimate the gravity of this situation," he said. As the agent walked away to speak to his superiors, Marcus and Jake exchanged nervous glances. The idea that they were about to launch a sting operation against the organization excited and terrified them at the same time. After a few minutes, the agent returned, his expression grave. "I thank you for bringing this to our attention. We will investigate the situation and take appropriate action. We need you to be available for any additional information we may require. We're here to help. We need to do this before anyone gets hurt," Marcus replied, the determination in his voice unwavering. The agent nodded, and Marcus felt a weight lifted from his shoulders. They had taken the first step towards something bigger, a fight against prejudice that could save lives. As they left the office, Jake turned to Marcus. "Do you think they'll do anything? Do you think they'll be able to stop this?" "I don't know, but we did our part. Now it's up to them to act," Marcus replied, feeling a mixture of relief and uncertainty. The walk back to the car was filled with thoughtful silences. Marcus knew the battle was far from over. They had only just begun a fight that would extend far beyond the walls of the organization. But for now, he had to believe that they had planted the seed of change. With adrenaline still pumping through their veins, Marcus and Jake left the FBI building. The night air was cool, but the pressure of what was to come was oppressive. They knew they only had a few days until the scheduled attack, and the countdown was on. "What now?" Jake asked, his voice shaking slightly. "What do we do until then?" "We need to stay alert and gather more information if possible. And also prepare for the worst," Marcus replied, the determination in his voice unwavering. "We need to make sure we leave nothing to chance. And, if necessary, be ready to act on our own if the FBI fails to act in time." Jake's gaze lit up. "Are you talking about us infiltrating the group further?" "Exactly. We need to figure out the details of the attack plan and make sure we're ready to intercept them if the FBI doesn't arrive in time," Marcus said, his brain working quickly to formulate a plan. The night dragged on, and they discussed their strategy. Marcus knew that the longer they spent away from the organization, the harder it would be to gather crucial information. They couldn't afford to be discovered, but the risk was something they had to calculate. The next day, as the sunlight began to lighten the horizon, Marcus and Jake met at the entrance to the organization's headquarters. Their nervousness was palpable, but the determination in their eyes was undeniable. As soon as they walked in, the mood was different. The conversations they had usually heard about camaraderie and ideals were now filled with tension and excitement. Frank seemed to be at the height of his rhetoric, urging the group members to prepare for a historic moment. "Let's show them we're strong. We can't let them see us as weak," he shouted, and the crowd responded with applause and cheers of support. Marcus and Jake exchanged glances, anxiety racing between them. "This doesn't look good." "They're more motivated than ever," Jake whispered. "We need to hear everything we can. The more we know about the plan, the better we can prepare," Marcus whispered back. As the meeting progressed, Marcus positioned himself near the center, using his cell phone to discreetly record every word Frank uttered. He knew that the recording could be the key to convincing the FBI of the seriousness of the situation. Frank was now inciting violence in a more direct way. "We're at war. They'll never respect us unless we show our strength. Saturday's event will be our moment to shine," Frank proclaimed, and the audience applauded in response. Marcus felt a knot form in his stomach. Time was running out. After the meeting, as the group members dispersed, Marcus and Jake stood back for a while. "We need to find a way to find out the specifics of the attack. Something that will tell us what they're really planning," Marcus suggested, his mind racing with ideas. Jake looked around, assessing the situation. "We can try to find someone who's willing to talk. Maybe there's a member who isn't completely aligned with what Frank is proposing," he said, his gaze piercing. "Good idea. Let's keep an eye out for anyone who seems hesitant. If we can pull it off, it might be our chance to find out what's going on behind the scenes," Marcus replied. They spent the next few days mingling with the group, keeping an eye out for any signs of weakness or doubt among the members. Random conversations became a strategy, and little by little, they began to notice that there was a growing divide between the younger and older members. One afternoon, While observing a heated discussion between two members of the group, Marcus noticed a young woman who seemed to have doubts about the guidelines Frank was imposing. She was hesitant, looking around as if she wanted to get away from the group. "Look, that girl. She seems conflicted," Jake whispered, his expression intent. "Let's get closer. Maybe she can help us," Marcus said, determined. The two approached the woman once the argument had died down. "Hi, are you okay?" Marcus asked, trying to sound friendly. She looked at them suspiciously, but something in her eyes showed that she was struggling with what she was feeling. "Yeah, I'm just thinking. I'm not sure about all of this," she replied hesitantly. "We get it. Sometimes it's hard to be on the right side. What Frank's saying doesn't sound right, does it?" Jake said, sensing the opportunity. "I don't know. I don't like the way he talks about purifying things. That doesn't seem like what we should be doing," the woman replied, her voice low. "You're not alone in this. We know many of you are feeling this way. What he's planning for Saturday, it's not right. It won't just be a protest. It will be an attack," Marcus said, looking straight into her eyes. The woman looked startled. "What do you mean? Do you know what's going on? We need you to trust us. We're here to try to stop this. If you know anything that could help us stop them, please let us know. We can't let innocent people get hurt," Jake pleaded, his concern evident. She looked at the two of them, her expression uncertain. I may know more, but I can't say it here. It's too risky. If anyone knows I'm doubting what Frank says, I'm done for," she said, her gaze lost in thought. "We understand. Let's meet somewhere else. Somewhere you feel safe," Marcus suggested, feeling hope grow. After some discreet exchanges of information, they arranged to meet at a quiet cafe in the city center. It was a safe place, away from the prying eyes of the organization. As they prepared for the meeting, Marcus felt a mixture of anxiety and hope. "If she really has information, this might be our chance to stop this," Marcus said, his voice full of determination. "We need to make sure everything is ready for Saturday. However, we also need to be ready for what will happen if she tells us something that will change the course of things." "We don't know who we can trust," Jake replied, his gaze serious. When the day of the meeting arrived, Marcus and Jake were nervous but determined. They arrived at the cafe, carefully watching every movement around them. Finally, the young woman walked in, her expression nervous. She sat at the table with them, and Marcus sensed the urgency of the situation. "Thank you for meeting with us," Marcus said, trying to ease the tension. "We need to know what you know about the attack plan." The woman took a deep breath, the words coming out thickly. I heard Frank talking about what's going to happen. They're preparing to attack during the event, and I don't agree with it. Many of us don't agree with this approach, but we're afraid to speak up," she confessed, her gaze filled with concern. Marcus exchanged a look with Jake, his heart pounding. "We need more details. What are the exact plans? What did you hear?" The woman hesitated, but eventually began to share the information she knew. "I heard they plan to use weapons. Frank is urging everyone to prepare for a confrontation. He said we need to show them who we really are and that we can't let the authorities stop us," she said, her tone nervous. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "This is very serious. We need you to help us stop this. Can you connect us with others who also doubt what Frank is doing?" "Maybe, but I need time to think and feel safe. I don't want to be exposed," she replied, her voice shaking. "We understand. Do what you think is best, but please don't hesitate to contact us. We need to act fast," Marcus pleaded, his determination to protect innocent lives pulsing within him. As the conversation unfolded, hope grew in Marcus. With the information they were gathering, there was a real chance of stopping the attack and saving lives. The fear was still there, but now there was also a glimmer of hope. They were fighting for something bigger and more important than their own lives. The next few days were marked by increasing tension. With the information the young woman had shared, Marcus and Jake were determined to act. Saturday was fast approaching, and time was running out. As they prepared to meet with the woman, Marcus reflected on how much the situation had changed. The small hope he had felt at the beginning was now turning into an unshakable determination. They had to do something. They couldn't just stand by. "We must ensure that others in the organization who are hesitant join us. We need to create a movement," Marcus said, his voice filled with fervor. Yeah, but how are we going to do that without drawing Frank's attention? Jake asked, his concern evident. If he finds out we're trying to destabilize him, it'll be dangerous. Marcus nodded, knowing the situation was delicate. We need to be cunning. The idea is to raise doubts in the other members without letting Frank notice. Let's meet with the woman and discuss this. When they arrived at the cafe again, the young woman was visibly nervous. Hi, thanks for meeting me again, she said, her eyes darting around as if she feared being followed. We're here to help. What have you been able to find out since we last spoke? Marcus asked, his voice soft and encouraging. She took a deep breath before answering. I've spoken to some of the others. Some of them really don't agree with what Frank is doing, but they're afraid to speak out. They believe that if they join you, they might put themselves in danger. Jake interjected. But what if we found a way to show them that the real threat comes from Frank? If we can share his ideas with them, we might spark doubt and get them to rally to our side. The young woman nodded. If we can get evidence of what he's planning, maybe people will start to question himself and rally behind us. But it's risky. If Frank finds out, it could be dangerous for all of us. We need to act quickly. The event is this Saturday, and we're running out of time, Marcus said, his determination fervent. We can use what we know and try to capture the attention of members who are uncertain. They began discussing strategies and ways to communicate with other members. The idea was to create a safe space where they could share their concerns about Frank's plans. Every detail seemed crucial. They needed to be careful. Let's have a meeting in a neutral location, away from headquarters. Somewhere they can feel safe and not fear reprisal, Jake suggested. After some discussion, they decided that a nearby park would be the ideal location. A lot of them frequent the park. It's a place where they can feel comfortable and discuss things openly, the young woman said, her voice brightening at the idea. With everything planned, they agreed to meet at the park the night before the event. Marcus and Jake spent the next few days preparing for the meeting, sharing information and fine-tuning details. Each of them knew that the success of that night could be the key to stopping the attack. On the night of the meeting, the mood was tense, but there was a palpable energy in the air. The park was softly lit by moonlight, creating an environment that felt both peaceful and expectant. Do you think they'll actually show up? Jake asked, looking around a little anxiously. If the people we talk to are willing to speak out, yes. And if not, we need to move forward anyway. We can't let fear keep them silent, Marcus replied, his voice firm. As the hours passed, a small but growing group began to appear. Each member's expressions reflected the anxiety and hesitation they felt. The young woman, who had not yet revealed her name, led the conversation. Thank you for being here. We need to discuss what Frank is planning and why it's so dangerous, she began, her voice shaking slightly. What he's inciting isn't just a protest, it's an attack. He wants us all to get involved in something that could cause pain to innocent people. Murmurs of concern began to echo through the group. But how can we oppose him? He is strong, and many of us are afraid. An older man said, his voice thick with uncertainty. We need to come together. If we are strong together, we can show Frank that he cannot control our actions. Our values should not include violence or hatred, Marcus said, his voice thick with passion. We must be the opposite of what he stands for. The faces around them began to light up at the thought of a united movement. The young woman shared the details of what she had learned from Frank and the plans for the attack. If we can come together and take a stand, we can slow or even stop this from happening, Jake added. We need courage. We are not alone. Gradually, more members began to join the conversation, expressing their concerns about Frank's approach. Hesitations were replaced by growing determination. If we together form a peaceful and strong movement, we can show Frank that we are not just followers. We are thinking beings, said one of the younger members. As the meeting unfolded, the energy of camaraderie grew. The message of resilience and unity resonated with everyone. Marcus realized they were creating something bigger than they had ever expected. We need to be the voice of reason. We cannot allow violence to define who we are, the young woman said, and everyone agreed. Let's do this. Let's show Frank that we have courage and that we're not afraid to fight for what's right. One man said, and the crowd roared in approval. The atmosphere was electric with new hope. Our plan now is simple. Let's meet again tomorrow night and decide what to do at the event, Marcus concluded, feeling the strength of the union between them. The group dispersed with a new sense of purpose, and Marcus and Jake walked home, their spirits lifted by the strength of the community that had formed. That was amazing. I can't believe what we just did, Jake said, his expression beaming. We can really make a difference. Yes, and now is the time to act. Tomorrow night will be decisive. We must ensure that the message of peace and unity prevails over hatred, Marcus replied, his determination renewed. As the night turned into dawn, Marcus felt like the fight was just beginning, but the spark of hope that had been sparked at that meeting could turn into an unstoppable fire of change. With every step, he was closer to a future where racism and hatred had no place. The morning of the event arrived with a palpable tension in the air. The sun was shining brightly, but a sense of unease hung over the city like a thick cloud. Marcus and Jake woke early, reviewing the strategies they had discussed in the previous meeting. The plan they had devised the night before was about to be put into action, and each of them was aware of the weight of responsibility they carried. "Are you ready for this?" Jake asked, looking at Marcus with an expression of determination mixed with anxiety. "I am. We have to do this for ourselves and for all those who believe in a future without hate," Marcus replied, the fervor in his voice shining through into his eyes. "We need to be the voice of reason today." As they prepared, Marcus reflected on everything that had happened in the past few days. He had faced his own fears, dealt with racism firsthand, and joined forces with people who, like him, sought change. He felt that no matter what happened, the fight against injustice and oppression would never be in vain. However, he couldn't ignore the sense of urgency. The event, which was supposed to be a simple protest, was about to turn into something much darker. They had to prepare for what was to come. The meeting was scheduled for the afternoon, but before that, Marcus and Jake headed to the park where they had met with the other members of the group. The space was filling up with people, some crowding around stalls selling food and drinks, others already expressing their opinions about what they expected from the event. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. "Look, there are a lot of people here already. They really believe they're fighting for a cause," Jake observed, watching the crowd gather. "Yes, and that's what we need to channel. We need to show them that there is another way to fight. A way without violence," Marcus replied, his eyes scanning the crowd for familiar faces. Finally, he spotted the young woman who had joined them. She was with a few members who had pledged to speak out against Frank's plans. Marcus waved to her and watched her approach. "Hey, are you guys ready?" she asked, a mix of nervousness and determination in her eyes. "We are ready, and we are here to show everyone that we can do this peacefully. We need each and every one of you to spread this message," Marcus said, feeling the responsibility increase. As the crowd grew, the energy was contagious, but Marcus also noticed a separate group, further away. They were organized, talking in low voices, their expressions serious. He knew Frank and his supporters were there too, watching every move. "What do you think they're planning?" Jake asked, following Marcus' gaze. "I don't know, but it doesn't look good. We need to stay on guard and make sure our message of peace doesn't get lost in the turmoil," Marcus replied, a knot forming in his stomach. As the event began, Marcus felt torn between joy at the gathering and worry about what might happen. They formed a circle, and the young woman began to speak, her voice booming over the crowd. "Today we are here to show that we can be the change we want to see. We stand together against violence and hate. We will not allow the voices of oppression to dominate this space," she proclaimed, and the crowd responded with applause and cheers of support. Marcus looked around, seeing the determination on everyone's faces. He knew he was on the right path, and as the woman spoke, he felt a surge of courage flow through him. They were coming together, ready to fight for what they believed in. But then, a scream rang out in the distance, interrupting the celebration. Marcus turned quickly and saw Frank and his group approaching. The expression on Frank's face was one of pure hostility. He was accompanied by several members who looked ready for confrontation. "Look, they're here," Jake exclaimed, his terrified gaze fixed on Frank's towering figure. "We need to stay calm. We can't let them provoke us," Marcus said, his voice low and controlled. He knew that any sign of weakness could trigger a violent reaction. Frank raised his hand, gesturing to the crowd. You think you can stop us? You are weak. What we want is real change, not the mediocrity you represent, he shouted, his words echoing with contempt. The crowd fell silent for a moment, the tension palpable. Marcus felt his heart race. This was the crucial moment. They needed to respond, but in a way that would not provoke violence. This is not the way to fight. We do not need violence to be heard. We are the voice of reason, he shouted, raising his hand to silence the crowd. We will not be intimidated. We are strong together. The young woman beside him joined him. Together, we can make a difference. We will not allow hate to define us. Hearing this, the crowd began to stir again, expressing support with shouts and applause. Marcus felt a temporary relief. They were managing to keep their cool, but Frank's presence was a constant reminder that the battle was far from over. If you think you can stop us, you're sorely mistaken, Frank shouted, his eyes flashing with anger. Today, we're going to show everyone who's really boss. The members of Frank's group began to organize themselves, advancing toward the peaceful crowd. The mood changed quickly, and Marcus realized that the moment to act was approaching. We need to make a line of defense. Let's stand together and show that we're here for peace, Marcus ordered, his heart pounding. The young woman stood beside him, and together, they began to create a human barrier between the peaceful protesters and Frank's attackers. Stay together. Don't be intimidated, Marcus shouted, his voice firm. The group members began to form a line, standing side by side, determined to show that unity and peace were stronger than any form of violence. Frank, realizing that his aggressive approach was not working, stopped and looked at the crowd. You are wasting your time. Change will only come through force, he insisted. We don't need force. We need understanding and respect, Marcus shouted back, the fervor in his voice echoing through the air. The fighting was getting closer, and the atmosphere was tense. But Marcus refused to give in. He knew he was fighting not only for his own life, but for the lives of all the innocent people who could be affected by this attack. They had to prevail. Today, we are here to make a difference, not to fight, he said, his voice ringing with determination. And so, amidst the chaos, a moment of silence fell. Marcus looked into the eyes of the crowd, feeling the strength of their unity. And as Frank walked forward, he knew the fight was just beginning. Change was coming, and he was willing to fight for it. Tension hung in the air like a heavy blanket as Frank and his group advanced toward the peaceful protesters. Marcus felt his heart race. The situation was about to escalate. He looked at the faces around him, noticing the determination reflected in his comrades' eyes. They were ready to resist, but fear was there too, a subtle whisper that threatened to destabilize the strength they had built. Remember, we can't let them provoke us. We need to stay calm no matter what, Marcus said, his voice steady and controlled. He turned to the young woman beside him, who was breathing deeply, gathering her own courage. Are you okay? She nodded, but her eyes betrayed a mix of nervousness and bravery. Yes, I'm ready. We need to show them we're not afraid. As Frank and his supporters approached, Marcus's crowd began to organize. As the voices of support grew louder, they formed a solid line, unity visible on each determined face. The mood was intense, but there was a vibrant energy, a collective commitment to fighting for what was right. Do you think you can intimidate the true strength of this movement? Frank shouted, his voice booming through the crowd. We are the voice of change, and you are just fearful followers. Followers of love, respect, and peace. We are not like you, Marcus retorted, his voice rising. He could feel the strength of the crowd behind him, and it gave him even more courage. One of Frank's group, a tall, muscular man, stepped forward. We're going to put an end to this farce. It's time for you to see who's really in charge. He brandished a flag bearing words of hatred and violence. The gesture further inflamed the tension in the air. We don't need violence to be heard, the young woman shouted, raising her hands in a sign of peace. Real change comes from understanding, not force. Marcus knew this was the crucial moment. They needed to stand together and show that they were more than just words. They needed to be the action. He turned to the crowd. Just remember, we are a group of peace. If we stand together, we are stronger than any threat. With those words, something began to happen. The energy in the crowd intensified, and Marcus's supporters moved as one. They held up signs with messages of love, respect, and solidarity, creating a sea of color and positivity in the face of the hostility Frank represented. "Look at them. They're weak," Frank shouted, his anger evident. "Do you really think this is going to work? You're just a joke." But the crowd did not relent. "We are not a joke. We are the change. And we are here to stay," someone shouted. And that was enough to further ignite the collective determination. Marcus felt a rush of hope. The crowd was beginning to shout in unison, their voices blending into a powerful chant of resistance. They were coming together, not just as individuals, but as a community standing against oppression. "We will not allow hate to win," the young woman shouted, her voice echoing over the crowd. "We will not let them define us." But Frank was not about to back down. He made a sharp gesture to his supporters, and the group began to advance more quickly. Marcus knew that time was running out and that the situation was about to turn violent. "Ready. Hold the line," Marcus ordered, his voice firm and resonant. He couldn't allow fear to creep in. "If we must act, let it be for peace." Marcus's supporters moved in unison, determined to protect themselves and each other. The air was thick with the anticipation of a confrontation, and emotions ran high. The line of defense was up, and they were ready to fight not with violence, but with the strength of unity. Frank, noticing the determination in their eyes, hesitated for a moment. He looked at his supporters in confusion. "What are you doing? They are nothing. Let's put an end to this." But before he could act, one of his group members, an older woman, raised her voice. "Frank, we don't have to do this. Look at them. They're not armed. They're here for a cause. We shouldn't be like them." Her appeal gave Frank's crowd pause. Some began to look at the protesters, admiring the courage and unity they saw. The scene was powerful, a vision of peaceful resistance against hostility. "You are not just followers of a movement. You are human, and that means something. Let's fight for change, but not violence," she insisted. The message echoed in the air, and Marcus felt a surge of hope run through his body. "Yes, we are all human. We will not let hostility tear us apart," he shouted, gesturing to the crowd. And then, as if a spell had been broken, Frank's crowd began to disperse. Some abandoned their supporters, others walked away, touched by the message of peace that was being proclaimed. Frank, now isolated, turned around, his expression a mixture of anger and confusion. "You have no idea what you're doing. You're just prolonging the pain." But it was too late. The message of unity and peace had spread like wildfire, consuming the space that had previously been surrounded by fear and hostility. Marcus's crowd, now bolstered by the inclusion of some of Frank's former supporters, began to move toward him, their voices louder than ever. "We will not be intimidated. We will not give in to hate," they shouted, and the energy in the crowd was electric, pulsing with new life. Frank, realizing that he had lost control of the situation, turned to the members who were still with him. "Come on, we don't need this. They're weak." But his speech had no effect. The peaceful resistance of Marcus and his team had shown that true strength lay not in shouting or violence, but in the ability to unite and stand up against oppression. And so, as the crowd cheered and united, Marcus realized that they had won a crucial battle that day. They had not only defended themselves, they had united in a message of hope and love that would echo beyond that event, touching the lives of all who heard it. He looked at the young woman beside him, and she smiled. "We did it. We really did." "Yes, and this is just the beginning," Marcus replied, feeling a surge of gratitude and hope. But as the celebratory party unfolded, a sense of unease formed in his mind. He knew that Frank would not give up so easily. It was only a battle won, and the war for change was far from over. After the tumult of the event, the atmosphere around him began to change. The crowd, once filled with tension and fear, was now alive with a sense of achievement and unity. Voices of support echoed, and Marcus, still breathing deeply, watched the expressions of relief and joy on the faces of the people around him. Yet even as they celebrated, he couldn't ignore the knot of worry in his stomach. Frank had retreated, but that didn't mean the fight was over. It was an incredible victory, the young woman said, her smile lighting up her face. We really showed them that peace is more powerful than violence. Marcus smiled, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Yes, but we can't get carried away by the euphoria. Frank won't give up so easily. He's dangerous and he might still have plans. Jake leaned closer, listening to the conversation. I agree with you, Marcus. We need to stay vigilant. This was a victory, but the battle for acceptance and equality is still far from won. As the crowd began to disperse, many began to gather in small groups, discussing next steps and how they could continue to promote the message of peace they had championed that day. It was inspiring to see so many passionate and committed people. Let's meet later and discuss our strategies. We need to plan what we'll do next and how we can maintain the momentum we've gained here, Marcus suggested, looking at his friends and allies. The young woman nodded, full of enthusiasm. That's it. We need to turn this energy into something lasting. As everyone dispersed, Marcus decided it was time for a moment of reflection. He walked away for a while, looking for a quiet place where he could think and process everything that had happened. He found a park bench, still warm from the sunlight, and sat down. The noise of the city seemed distant as he contemplated the day's events. He thought about what he had faced. The racism, the hostility, and the need to fight not just for himself, but for all who had suffered unjustly. The memory of Frank's disdainful look still haunted him. What made him so determined to spread hate? And what could he do to change that mindset? Marcus realized that to win the battle, it was not enough to simply bring people together around a cause. It was also necessary to change minds and hearts. And this required continuous work, an education that went beyond the superficiality of the demonstrations. After a few moments of reflection, he got up from the bench and began walking back to the meeting point, determined to share his thoughts with the others. The city was full of life, and as he walked, he felt strengthened by the idea that they were building something meaningful. Guys, Marcus exclaimed as he arrived back. We need to address the root causes of the problem. We can't just react to what Frank and others like him do. We need to make real change, teach people about empathy and respect. How can we do that? Jake asked, his expression intent. We could organize workshops and discussions. We need to create a safe space where people can learn and share their experiences. It could help open the minds of those who don't yet understand our struggle, Marcus suggested, his eyes shining at the possibility. The young woman nodded excitedly. I love this. We can use social media to promote these events. We need more people to join us. And so, as the sun began to set, they began to outline their plans. The energy that had been generated during the event still pulsed between them, and the determination was evident. They were determined to turn this victory into something lasting. Over time, groups began to spread throughout the city, organizing events and creating a network of support. Marcus became one of the main organizers, dedicating his evenings and weekends to this new cause. He was energized, feeling that each small action contributed to a larger movement. However, Frank's shadow was never far away. He knew that as his group grew, so too could the hostility. News of fighting in other parts of the city began to surface, and Marcus was alarmed to realize that this was not just his fight, but the fight of all those seeking justice and equality. One night, after a long meeting, Marcus received a message on his phone. It was from a childhood friend who lived in a neighborhood plagued by racial tensions. Marcus, things are getting serious here. Tempers are flaring, and Frank and his group are trying to provoke us. We need help. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The fear that the situation might get out of hand paralyzed him for a moment. He knew he should go, but he also knew that this would be a potentially dangerous situation. I have to go. My friends need me, he told everyone. His voice steady despite the anxiety he felt. Jake frowned. You can't go alone. It might be a trap. Let us go with you. Yes, we'll be with you, the young woman offered, her gaze determined. We can't let you face this alone. Marcus smiled, grateful for the support. Thank you. We are in this together, and we need to stay alert. We cannot let violence overpower our message of peace. And so they prepared to leave, the determination in their eyes reflecting the seriousness of the situation. As they drove away, the city lit up under the stars, but the feeling of tension was more present than ever.